This is so fun. This is the first time I've been like in a bookstore doing a book event.
100%. And this was where I was for the very first in-person bookstore event for Where Cooking Begins. So it's like
beautiful.
3 years.
It comes full circle.
Yes, it does.
This is gorgeous. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you for coming.
This is thrilling. And we have like real humans and
Real
an audience.
We love it.
One of the weird things I think about my job, and probably your job too, in a slightly different way because you're much cooler than I am, is like I do like a moderate amount of talking to people about their books that they've written. And so I've done a lot of Zoom over the course of the pandemic. And I forgot how nice it is to like stare at faces that aren't my own. This feels really special.
I had the whole pandemic when like my son Cosmo, who's here, was on Zoom. Everyone I knew was on Zoom. It was like 24/7 Zoom. I was like weirdly completely outside of that world because I was working on a cookbook. So even to this day, I'm like, I'm going to message everybody, and I know I don't want to do that.
The crazy thing that I recently learned, which is way too late, and I assume everybody else learned this a long time ago, is that if you do a private chat to someone on Zoom, whoever's hosting the meeting can still see all the private chats.
What? No.
Fun fact. It has nothing to do with the cookbook, but like life tips that I learned way too late.
Signal. Everybody.
Take it to another channel. Yeah. So we're here tonight to celebrate your gorgeous new cookbook. I wish I had a copy of it to like hold up and
Thank you.
Those of you who are here, great. Yeah, we're gonna do it for the Zoom folks. Hold on, there's my mask. Okay, this is beautiful.
Thank you.
Sounds so good. So your first cookbook from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Has it really been 3 years?
It was March of 2019.
Wow.
Or was it 2018?
Well, it was great. Is where I was going.
Is it 2018?
I think it was 2018.
I think it was 2018 too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so Where Cooking Begins was one of my favorite cookbooks.
I didn't know this until we did that other event.
Well, I did put it on my best.
Well, that is true. But I thought that was more of like an intellectual like choice. No, not. But I didn't know. I knew that you wrote a lovely endorsement of it, but I didn't know that it was like a personal part of your home life. I don't know. I always think about things that are written are like a little bit removed from the practicality of it, you know? But then when we connected over the other Zoom, I was like, oh, I did, like it was, yeah.
No, I loved it. And one of the things that I really loved about it was that you put forward this philosophy that thinking about home cooking begins with how you shop for your ingredients or prepared foods or whatever it is that goes into it. And I think it's been a really long time since I saw someone so beautifully and forcefully articulate that. And I think it's essential. I mean, it changes so much of what I learned in your cookbook, changed the way that I think about the way that I approach cooking. And I'm curious, so is today the official book day?
Yesterday.
Yeah. So this is your book, so at least one person here has a copy of it. But here, and I can give it back to you. But I'm assuming folks watching on Zoom maybe have not had a chance to page through it yet. I have, because I got to prep for this.
You got
to
scroll
super
through
awesome,
it.
and I got to be very cool and read it ahead of time. What makes this book different from your first book? Where does this have a sort of grounding philosophy?
Great question. There are things about Where Cooking Begins that I was very attached to and wanted to bring into whatever I did next. So the shopping philosophy of like, just as a recap, like dividing things between things that you should shop for in person and things that are totally okay to order online. That is how I shop. It's how I cook. And it was still true when I was developing That Sounds So Good. And the way that philosophy sort of follows into the recipe pages is that the ingredients are separated by market and home. So it's really easy to kind of just get reminded of like, oh, these are like those are more of the things I could just have at home. I'm not answering your question. I'm telling you how it was similar. I think the main grounding philosophy for That Sounds So Good was that I wanted it to really reflect like what cooking at home actually looks like. And because I wrote it in the pandemic, I was like very aware of what cooking at home really means.
Like,
And
really.
what it really
Yeah.
is. Yeah. I mean, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I was like lunch lady, and I was developing a book and like filming from home. And so you become much more aware of like, how annoying is this? How many bowls are there really? What is this time? How is this time being spent? But the biggest thing for me was like the way that I cook during the week and the way that I cook on the weekend are two completely different ways of cooking. Like cooking during the week is like start doing something, pull things out of the refrigerator, start cooking some of them. Maybe some of these other things are going to end up in the dish, but you just need to keep moving because we need to eat. Whereas on the weekend, it's a much more romantic approach to like more of a project cooking, more like something in the oven for 4 hours, farmer's market haul, farm box, stuff like that. But still on the weekends, I want that active time to be short. So like all in all, like no one should really have to spend more than 30 or 40 minutes like doing. And during the week, you're doing for 30 or 40 minutes and then you're eating. And on the weekend, it's like doing a little bit of work and then like something like the ragu goes on the stove for 3 hours. So like the time that you had to spend is sort of the same, but sometimes food is cooking by itself.
It's like different versions of efficiency.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And a lot about, I really wanted to like think about and talk about time management. And so the recipes are organized in chronological order. So I don't, in the ingredient list, unless it's something like a stir fry or a baking recipe where you do need to have everything like meased out. I don't call for like 4 carrots chopped or an onion diced because I'm going to tell you when the right time to do that is in the process.
That's actually the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and something I was so in love with, because one of my, I don't know, little bugbears is I always get really, I'm pretty attuned to how recipes are written. I used to edit recipes and write recipes. And I think for anybody who cooks a lot at home, you start noticing that everybody writes recipes a little bit differently. You can maybe like tell the difference between Food and Wine's house style and Sabr's house style and Bonap's house style. And like, you start picking up on quirks. And if you're anything like me, getting very judgmental when people do things that you think is wrong. And you, in this book, make a point of doing my favorite thing, which is not pretending that the work isn't work. Like
Right.
if you say, you know, half an onion chopped in the ingredients, it makes the steps look shorter, but you're just kind of lying about
100%.
the work was.
And then I also feel like, and I hated the magazines that I worked for at Everyday Food. They wanted you to put on the recipe inactive and active time. And it's like, that's no, like my active time is completely different from another cook's active time. Like my dad's sitting down with his paring knife to trim string beans while he's like watching a basketball game is like a different amount of time than me like lining all of them up and hacking off all the bottoms of, so you can't really say that. And it is like a thing you have to do. And it also might represent a bowl you had to take out, another knife you had to clean, another like 2 cutting boards or whatever it was. But when I wrote Where Cooking Begins, I had a full-time job and I was in the test kitchen every single day. And when I wrote That Sounds So Good, I was supposed to have been alone in my kitchen, listening to whatever I wanted to listen to and cooking and being really thoughtful and having a whole thing.
Right.
And then I had like 6 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. And then
beautiful.
it was March. And then everybody was like, honey, honey, I'm home.
So that process of recipe writing and kind of coming around to this idea of, you know, rejecting active time as an entire concept, how did that develop for you? Like, how did you learn how to write a recipe? Has it changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really learned how to write a proper recipe. Like I didn't know until I got to Everyday Food that when you wrote a recipe, the way you call for an ingredient in that recipe is the way you have to call for that ingredient anytime you write a recipe, which is really annoying. And I don't like it. And I didn't know that those things like really existed until learning about them in a you know, editorial published kind of a way where the copy editors were like, this is how we describe this, you know? And I wanted my recipes to have more, to feel like I'm talking to you. And writing a recipe, like, you know, can be just a very technical language. It's like, a math book or like a roadmap or whatever, technical language. And I just wanted it to sound like I was talking to you. The problem with that is that usually takes a lot more words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're doing a magazine, that's really tough.
Right.
Because I remember when I used to work at a print magazine, we had an issue that was all about donuts. And so we had hundreds of donut recipes, and we were running for the entire magazine, like a half a column over. And so we changed our style guide to change the spelling of the word donut from DOUGHNUT to DONUT.
Did 3 copy editors like have a heart attack and die?
Like,
yeah.
And changing the spelling of that one word like bought us the space that we needed. But it's so much about space. On the other hand, with a book, you can be you, like you can flex and stretch out.
There's a degree of that, but then there's also fitting 100 recipes into like 288 pages and not wanting, one thing that really bugs me, and I'm curious if bugs you too, is like when a recipe continues onto the second page, but only like this much, it makes me nuts. And like, that's what years of copy fitting like did for me. And that's that's like a page that could have a full page image. And I don't want like a half page image like that. And my designer was just like, oh no, we cannot. So some of the recipes I couldn't cut enough to get into one page, and those are spreads. And some of the recipes that fit, but just meant that the spinets had to be shorter. So there's like some spinets for sure that I had longer, like I had more suggestions, but.
And with the spinach, you need the little boxes where you suggest alternatives.
Yeah,
right.
And those now in this book run at the bottom of the page. So, they're columns. And it was like, trying to like cutting the word escarole in exchange for endive, which is like a few characters shorter. Like,
donut, right? Like that's in there. Absolutely. So did your palette change from book 1 to book 2? You have such a clear flavor style. Like there's a vibe.
Garlic and oil.
Lots of
yeah.
I was reading through it, I was thinking like this is a lot of like funky green. Like a lot of green, but it's like fuck you green, not like delicate retiring.
Yes.
Which is garlic and oil. And you also have a really coherent flavor vibe in Where Cooking Begins, but do you think it's changed? Are you growing and changing?
I think I have gotten over a couple of my biggest food aversions. Number 1 was dill, and like I have graduated, so I'm like working on that. I think it was more like psychological of just being comfortable with the fact that the food I love to make the most and the food I like to eat a lot is familiar flavors, right? And I am not like a chef like Ignacio Matos or, someone who's gonna come up with a new flavor combination. And I also don't know enough different cuisines to have exposure to like be doing something really different. And I think I was a little bit like, felt like I had to show that I could invent something new with Where Cooking Begins. And in That Sounds So Good, I became more comfortable with the idea of like, it's okay to not invent a new flavor. Like there are cooks who do that and that is their style and it's really cool. But like my style is garlic and oil. And then I really was like, are people gonna be pissed if like every recipe starts with 6 cloves of garlic? Like
no, I don't know. I mean, like admittedly, like when I've been reading this over the last couple of days, I've been very hungry. But good. I just keep being like, oh, like I keep opening my fresh start cart and just like adding more anchovies and more garlic and more. So I want to talk to you about one particular recipe, which I love because I love celery.
Yes.
You know which one I'm going to talk about because it is called Sorry, I Love Celery. Yeah. And it's basically like a Caesar salad, but with celery instead of lettuce.
Basically.
And it's instantly the only thing I've ever wanted to eat in my entire life. And I want to, I don't know, I don't even know what my question is. Just like,
well, do you like celery?
Yes.
Yes.
But just like talk.
Celery is like turnips. Celery is like, oh, you're falling on one side or the other.
Celery.
People
I didn't
hate.
Why?
My first editor
hated
celery and would be like,
people?
can you offer an alt for celery? And I'm like, is this a you thing or like a me thing or what? Like, you don't care for the stuff.
I like celery.
You do? Oh,
Yeah.
it's your brother hates celery. I have another really good friend who eats everything, and he, like, the sight of celery will upset him.
I don't get it.
I
I
love
guess I have
celery.
to respect it, but like I don't get
It's
it.
crunchy in a way that it's crunchier than cucumbers. It
Mhm.
has that like hard crunch of fennel, but it's super dense. It's inexpensive. You get so much for one bunch. It comes with its own built-in herbs in the middle.
Mhm.
And it has like different, like the outer guys taste different from the inner guys. So you get like a kind of a flavor spectrum.
Yes.
Don't buy the hearts, like you can if you want, but it's kind of like buying a baby carrot, which is like a carved carrot finger. Because the outside of the celery has a different flavor.
Yeah, it's
You might
denser
need to
and a little
peel
more
it.
bitter.
Yeah.
But that's awesome.
Awesome. I don't love it braised, and I know that some people really do, but raw is great. And then that salad, it's all the flavors of the Caesar, but it's not an emulsified dressing.
Mhm.
So it's like a broken vinaigrette with some chilies in it, and yeah.
And it's one of my sort of cooking revelations over the pandemic has been celery as like an all-purpose raw green thing that can kind of be fake lettuce. And one of the things that I realized was like that bitterness, which I love, and I guess some people don't because they're crazy, is so beautifully tempered by like those other super strong flavors.
Yeah.
So I would frequently make Gabrielle Hamilton's celery toast, for example, where it's like celery and a ton of garlic and blue cheese.
Oh,
And I was just like, okay, this is the thing I do with celery. And now you have given me a new thing.
that's
to
so
do with
funny that you
celery.
said that, because during the pandemic, I don't know where it came from, but a certain day I was like, I am craving cracker, good blue cheese, cracked black pepper. Do you remember when I went through that phase? And it was like, and butter. So just
Yes.
like butter, like soft butter, the shingles of the blue cheese, the black pepper. And I was like, this is the fucking best thing I've ever had. And that's what I mean. Like, it's okay to like that and to just be like, this is really great. You should eat this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Sorry, I didn't even have a question, but I just wanted to be like,
Oh, no,
this
I just wanna
recipe
talk about
exists.
I mean, I do think it's divisive. Like, we have
Wait, can we take a bold
three.
raise your hand if you
We've-
don't like celery? Oh my
Okay,
God,
all right.
okay.
It's
Pretty
like a
good.
middle split.
Yeah, so I would say 7
We've aligned
people,
ourselves
we have
before.
2 celery.
2 to 5. That's
dislike.
pretty
Yeah.
good. Michael, you didn't vote.
Oh,
Oh, I like celery.
okay.
All right, so that's good
Two to five.
odds. But I know that people don't, so there's alts. Like, I think
So do you have to rename the dish? Because the dish is called
Sorry.
I really love celery.
it's right.
So if I use one of your alts, like if I used fennel.
If you use an alt, you'd be like, sorry, I don't care for it. Which is what,
What about for your editor? Are you
for my editor,
for
yeah.
your old editor?
right.
You could be like, this is for you.
Right, that's like, you're so vain, I bet you think this song is about you.
Oh my God. I love this idea of like spite recipes.
Oh, yeah.
Like recipes that are driven by
Mhm.
benevolent
I have
hatred.
one in my first book too.
Really?
Yeah, that's
Is it-
like an inside joke with another friend about another person.
If I like did a close read of your first book, would I be able to figure it out?
This is the first I'm hearing
Oh,
this
yeah.
secret.
You're good at keeping secrets, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Yeah,
right now.
So the quote that
Michael.
that Michael gave us at the beginning, I'm sorry, I was trying to remember the exact quote. I had notes for this and then I left
Oh,
them at home today
great.
because I'm a mess. But about how this book is for allowing people to cook without the emotional barriers, the psychological barriers, the psychic barriers that sort of stand between you and the stove. That really resonates with me. This time last year, I actually wrote a whole piece about how much I hated cooking and how weird it was to suddenly find myself after a lifetime of almost defining myself by how much I loved cooking, to find just no joy in it at all. And it's taken a while for it to come back. And, you know, my therapist and I have done a lot of talking about it, and I understand where it came from now, and I understand why it's going away.
Was
and
it a
lot of
pandemic related?
totally a
Yeah.
pandemic thing, right? Like I was channeling my ambient anxiety into a thing that I could control, and I felt guilty about having fun. And I think things that were pretty universal, especially for people who are probably in my like extraordinarily fortunate position where I still had a job, I still had healthcare, like it was just ambiently miserable as
Yeah,
opposed to
right.
actively. did you go through anything like this? Like,
Yeah.
has cooking always, because you write about cooking so exuberantly and so centrally to like your sense of self and family.
For sure, that is true. And I realized at like a very old stage, late, like in my 30s, I was like, this is the one actual thing that I have that is creative. Like I had grown up feeling that I didn't have a talent, right? Like dancing, singing, drawing, painting, like sculpting. Like my sister's very artistic and can make things with her hands. And I had friends who could like sing and dance. And I was like totally tone deaf despite my last name. And that was like, okay, you know, and then there was one day I was like, literally I was cooking and I was like, oh, this is my thing where I like can create a thing. And like, it's just a transformation. And I was very like proud of myself. But yeah, it gets exhausting and horrible. And the hardest part, I think the pandemic was just like the repetition of it, the never having a break from it. And also so much excitement I think I get about food is like having other people cook for me. So whether that's at somebody else's home or in a restaurant, preferably, and that was completely gone. And to be able to be cooked for also is like inspiring and energizing and interesting. And like, that was so amazing. I love those flavors. I could never execute it that way, but like gets an idea in your head and then you do your own version of that. And so much of food is like that. So that was gone. And then you're just like in your own head so much that there were days that I'm just like, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just like is, and maybe it's fine. And maybe it's like the worst thing ever. So having people to taste for you and give you some feedback was very helpful. But there were some things like there's a carrot dish in the book, a roasted, it's like pan roasted carrots with chorizo, nubbins.
Yes, I love that. I'm fixated on that word.
I was like, I got the word nubbins into
And
the
the
book.
carrots are also kind of funny in the photo, and I was just like, oh, this is a total nubbin situation. It was incredible.
I
Yeah.
was very pleased that nubbins like got passed. There's things that like your editor's like, yeah, sure, nubbins, but then when it gets to the copy edit, they're like, not a word. Please replace like with a word, and just like stat, you know, like I'm gonna that dish started as like 7 different things, and by the time I made that version of it, I was like, if this doesn't work, there's no carrot in the book. Like I'm not making it again. And every version I would have this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna do turmeric and like a thing, and then I'm gonna brown that, and then there's gonna be like a braising liquid, and then it's going to be a glaze, and then I would make it and be like, I hate this. I hated making it. I hate how it tastes. I hate how it looks. I'm never making it again. I'm not putting it in the book. So yeah, I always talk about like, so I have my 2 children and my husband, and this person is an amazing eater, but selective. So there's,
For those of you on Zoom, she's staring at one of her children.
I am. Cosmo music in the house.
Yeah.
So there were things that I could make and give to him and be like, what do you think of this? Taste it. And he would be like, very nicely take the bite and look at me and be like, I'm sure some people would like this. It's not for me.
That's so
Yeah,
diplomatic.
really nice.
That's
And just
really
be
lovely.
like, I probably won't take another bite, but I'm sure it'll work for someone. And then my husband, who's just like, ooh, is this for the book? Or is this what we're having for dinner? Is this like super excited, eats all the things, is just thrilled and delighted. And it really came down to my older son, who is extremely empathetic, but has an amazing, his palate's way better than mine. He and my sister have a palate, like he can take a bite of something and be like, you know, is there cardamom in this? And I'm like, how did you know that? It's crazy.
People like that are really incredible to me.
I'm like, I know if it's good or bad, and if it's bad, I have an idea of how to make it better, but I can't taste like things like that. So he would taste my food and be like, and I got good at reading his feedback, and he'll be honest with me, but like gentle. But that was a big thing that I lost in the pandemic, was being surrounded by cooks who were constantly tasting each other's food and giving very expert feedback that never felt personal, but could just be brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could feel.
Yeah.
Imagine
Yeah.
change
So
the
that
game pretty
was like,
dramatically.
it was more of just a, like, I don't even know if it's good. And frankly, I don't care.
So for somebody who maybe is in the position that I occasionally find myself in, the like pit of despair kind of thing, where it's like, I hate cooking.
Yeah.
Cooking's so stupid.
Yeah.
Are there like 1 or 2 recipes in the book that you think are like a good way back in?
Cooking is stupid, so I'm just trying to like
Like,
get my
set the
motivation,
scene,
right?
It's just like, why? Like, I want to sit in a dark room with a microwave burrito. Like,
Okay,
why?
yeah. I mean, Carol's fried bread is a thing that I love. That is my mom's fried bread. It's again like her recipe. This is good bread that is a couple days old that you cut thickly and you pan fry in olive oil, but not too hot because you don't want to burn the oil and you don't want to burn the bread, but you want that like sheer, super crispy surface, but the like airy, still moist in the center. Yeah. And then for me, it's like rubbing raw garlic on that and pepper and flaky salt. And that, if that is your dinner, that is like fine. So I would find the thing that you like to eat, because I think that's another big pressure that we put on ourselves is like, what's the new thing I'm going to make? What's the new recipe? What's a new thing I can do with like carrots or whatever? And that's fine if you're like psyched to always be trying out a new recipe. But I also think there's something really wonderful about, I know how to make this thing and I know how it makes me feel, and there's no reason to stop making it. So for me, that was pasta. We made pasta fagioli every Sunday. And it's the recipe for my first book, which is really my mom's recipe. And I never made it the same way twice that entire time. Like it kept like morphing into different things week after week. And like sometimes it had bacon and sometimes it had a ton of anchovies. And I started putting dried shiitake in it. And like it just kept changing, but I didn't really have to think about making it.
And that's, I mean, not to get like pedantic about it, but to me, like that's what cooking really is,
Totally.
right? Like regimentally following a recipe is perfectly fine the first time,
Right.
or the second or third time
Yeah.
if you're not like a super confident cook. But cooking isn't about following recipes.
Exactly.
Cooking is about improv.
Yeah. And creating something different.
Yeah.
And that's why like the spinets, I hope, like are just reminding people, first of all, if you don't have the paprika and you open to that recipe and it calls for paprika, it's like a lot of people are like, well, I guess I'm not making that. I have everything else and I don't have the paprika. Like I'm not. Like, no, you're totally still making that. But also to just like try it with that other thing the next time and then change it another time the next time until it's like, it's not my thing, it's your thing.
One of my friends who's a recipe writer calls this the very hard orange vegetable problem, where he's like, okay, you can have the sweet potato recipe and the butternut squash recipe and the pumpkin recipe. They're all the same.
Right.
Like the recipe really can just say, choose a very hard orange vegetable.
Exactly.
But
100%.
yeah, but you have to have confidence to do that. You have to know the ingredients. You have to have made the recipe enough to know whether it'll make a difference.
Or you just have to be able to read the recipe and be like, okay, this is whatever. The carrot, how long is the carrot going to be cooked
Another hard
for?
orange vegetable.
You know,
Right,
yeah. Is it going to be, am I having it raw, thinly sliced, long cooked? So then it's like the flavor and the texture. And if you can replace that with another ingredient, like great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a question of fluency. Probably on time, by the way.
Like a few more minutes.
Few more
Yeah.
minutes?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do a few more minutes. Another section of the book that I really loved was so many cookbooks, like maybe too many. Sometimes I feel like every single cookbook is written for someone who's never read a cookbook before, and I'm kind of like, okay, like thank you for telling us to get a cast iron pan.
Yeah.
But you have this section on tools that you might not already have.
Yes.
Which I love because.
And it was exactly because of that, because of so many, and they're all good, and it's always good advice.
Yeah.
But you open it up and it's like, what you need to before you start cooking this book, and it's like, yeah, if you just moved into your first apartment and that is a starter kitchen, like super helpful. But I didn't feel like I would bring anything new to that conversation because it's all great advice that you can totally get. So my little tool section is about things you might not own but could use, and they're all very multi-purpose tools, like having a mesh spider, like with the bamboo handle, because you don't need to spend the extra $30 to buy the like one that is all stainless steel from top to bottom, which I use for so many different things. Like the lifting and the lowering of the eggs, the scooping of the pasta, the getting the edamame out there, you know, flipping over something that's being fried, like very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, and almost all of them are these very kind of fundamental things, sort of like maybe not like 101 level kitchen tools, but like 102 level. And then you have the Grey Coon spoon,
Mhm.
which I would love to hear you talk about a little bit, because that's such an insidery, like
Mhm.
professional kitchen tool that, unlike so many professional kitchen things that have, you know, sort of disseminated to the average home cook, I
Yeah.
feel like those spoons are still kind of a secret.
The Coon spoon.
So tell us about the Coon spoon.
So the Coon spoon is named for Grey Coons, who's a chef who died just a couple of years ago. And he was actually the mentor to one of the chefs I worked for, Rocco DiSpirito, who I worked for 4 years. And that was the first kitchen at Union Pacific that I had ever seen a Coon spoon. And people just called them Coons, get a Coons. And I had no idea what that was.
Kunz.
Yeah.
You couldn't intuit that.
And so this is a spoon that Grey Coons had designed to his specifications. Like he was like, I need the perfect spoon. And it just is, it's a perfect spoon. It's perfectly balanced. It has like the perfect angle. The bowl of the spoon is deep, but not like a big bowl. And it tapers to a very fine point. So when you are working in a restaurant, you're using it obviously like for stirring and for plating and scooping. Like you can scoop out a big thing of taro puree, which was the thing I had to scoop when I worked at Union Pacific. But then because it comes to that tapered point, you could be spooning a sauce around the edge of the plate and get to that really like fine little tiny, you know, tail of the thing, or do dots. And so it's just one of those tools that feels really good in your hand. They're stainless steel, so they're super resilient. It's heavy without hurting. You know, it's just a perfect spoon.
How many do you have?
I have, I will admit to like having had the opportunity to take a couple home from shoots. So, well, there used to only be one size, and then they made a long one. So I have
A lot.
Cosmo just said a lot. No, I do. I have the original one, and then I have the original one in, they had a copper one that I bought for myself for Christmas. And then they came out with the 2 smaller Coon spoons. So I have 2 of those, and then the long one and the perforated one.
I have the perforated one,
The
which I
perforated
stole from
one.
a photo shoot. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
No, I just was talking about this with somebody else, and they were like, the Coon spoons are like $30. And I was like, they are not.
no, I never ate.
22,
But it's the perfect, like, how much would you pay for the perfect $30? It's a steal.
I
The
think if you
perfect
use,
spoon.
like, I also have a very nice 5-quart stainless steel food mill that I bought at JB Prince when I was a teeny weeny baby line cook, and I could not afford it. And it was one that had been returned to the store, and it didn't have the box. So it was like super marked down, and I was like, I can afford that one. And I bought it, and I was 26 or something. And that thing is, I just brought it out to make my tomato passata. Like, yeah, it's like good clothing, which like some women spend a lot of money on shoes.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I spent $30 on
I mean,
a
lift up
spoon.
your foot. Lift up your foot.
Yeah, my New
Those are
Balances.
cool
Yeah.
and comfortable. No, you know, it's interesting. I think if I could, I'm going to slightly derail this, but like, you know, I think there's the Instagramification of the world, which I sometimes really love and I
Mhm.
sometimes really hate, has sort of ushered in the era of like aesthetic cooking equipment.
Mhm.
And the thing that
DTC brands, I
Right.
could name a few.
there are several,
Yeah.
and among other things, one of the things that really, like, I feel like a cranky old person about is like when you buy certain like well-established like restaurant brand or like 100-300-year-old cookware company products, they last for 1,000 years. I mean, I have a Le
100%.
Creuset that I inherited from my great aunt. You know, it's like older than I am by a matter of decades. And I get very stressed about the idea of people buying a pan because it's a cute color and
Right.
like cycling through their pans the way
Yeah.
that you might cycle through like
The
whether you're
only
wearing
pan
skinny or
you
wide
should
jeans.
cycle through is your nonstick.
Yeah.
So all of the other ones, like, they should be around for like 20, 30, 40.
Right. Like your
Years.
spoon, which will last
Like
forever.
the spoon.
The $30 one though.
The
last
$30.
Well, for $30, like amortized over 30 years, it's like $1 a year.
Right. And how many spoons could you use at one time? You only need like 2.
I learned a new word a long time ago, and it's oodles.
Uh-huh.
And that is like the happiness you get from using or wearing something.
Wow.
It's like
Utiles.
specific-
It's utiles. I'm
Really?
sorry, I'm gonna
I don't know what the
I think, is it UTILES? Is that the word?
I feel like
Did
it
you
was
read it?
someone with an accent, and it could have been pronounced different. That's
I
just
like
how I
oodles
heard it.
better.
Yeah.
But
Oodles.
it's
It's one of those words that you rarely say and you see.
Yeah.
right. But it's like, how much happiness do you get from doing this?
That's
And
probably
like,
why they named oodles of noodles.
oh my god.
They must have. Yeah,
I like had like a hunger ricochet through our conversation where I'm just like, oh my god, the celery Caesar salad, and now I'm like cup noodles.
Right.
It's just like I'm having a situation. Maybe
Yeah.
we should throw over to audience questions because I'm rapidly falling apart.
That sounds so good.
I know, on the walk over here, I was like, we could get burgers, we could get this, we could get that. Like, a whole lot. We passed some million restaurants.
you saw like a bar, and we had
Yeah.
like walked past it, and you walked
Long Island
back.
bar.
Yeah. She walked.
Yeah.
So we like
I was like,
we were
hold
like
on, I got it.
we were like 3 houses down, and she just turned around without a word and started staring at the menu.
Yeah, that's what happens. New York City.
Exactly.
All right, so we have a couple of audience questions here. Also, if you're in this room, feel free to raise your hand. We'll try to call on you. So this first one comes from Orly. Orly asks, what's one vegetable that isn't particularly popular or easy to find that you personally love and wish would get the full kale level spotlight?
Well, in the same family as kale, the world of radishes and turnips, which are the other night, I have both in my fridge right now from the CSA, and I was like, they're the same. I was like, it's a radish a turnip or a turnip's a radish. Like, it doesn't matter. They are literally the same. I feel like people don't enjoy radishes enough, or turnips, or because there's so many kinds, and they're one of the vegetables that can be delicious, raw, slightly cooked, crisp, tender, braised, cooked to death, like versatile that way. And they have greens, and they can be spicy. So love a turnip, love a daikon radish, love the Hakurei turnips that are around right now, watermelon radish, the purple ones, the ones that are green on the outside and beautiful tie-dye in the middle. Yes, eat more radishes.
I feel like I've seen a lot of radishes in like foodstagrams,
Yes.
but not necessarily like in recipes.
I mean, there was a moment where the watermelon radish, it was like, okay, moratorium on the red.
I mean, they're like saying this in the past tense, but it's like
Still a thing.
so.
Yeah.
Some magazines Thanksgiving covers maybe have too many of them right now,
Ooh,
Who's going to a newsstand later?
All right, this one comes, oh, there's a question in the audience.
My question is, I know you were talking about how a lot of this book was inspired by actually like being in the kitchen during COVID cooking. So I was curious how many of these recipes you feel are really a reflection of like things that are in your repertoire that you just like love to make and serve for your family or other people coming over, versus how many times you were like, I need a carrot
Yes.
and I'm gonna figure it out and make it work.
Yeah, because these were kind of road tested at home. It's funny, I wrote the structure for the book before the pandemic, and I had the Monday through Thursday, Friday, and the weekend kind of structure worked out in advance. And then ironically, like days had no meaning. And I was like, I structured this whole thing around the idea that you would cook differently on the weekend, and like no one knows what day it is ever anymore. Like, and then I was like, well, it's great because the weekend ones are great if you work at home, like whatever. I think that there's a few that went into very heavy rotation and are still ones that I return to, and a lot in the Stovetop Suppers chapter. So the shrimp and kimchi over rice dish, which like we really love, the crispy gingery beef, which again is like probably we ate once a week. The tuna salad, weirdly, like we ate at least once a week. perfect pot of rice was in, I mean, early in the pandemic, I was like, the way that I have to think about feeding when I'm feeding a family is like meat or like protein, veg, starch. And like protein and veg alone, I was like, that's already a thing. So early on, I was just like, are you guys cool if I make rice every night from now on? And everybody was like, we are okay with that. And I was like, except for wonderful, because I can't have another thing. So like that pot of rice, now everyone in the family knows how many minutes and what the ratio is and how many times to rinse it. And so yeah, they're ones, and every time I cook my own recipe now too, I cross-test. Cross-testing is like check once the recipe's final, cooking through it, making sure timing and all those things are right. I had to do a lot of that my own. And every time I cooked a recipe of my own, I'm like, wow, it's good, pretty good. The celery Caesar I made the other day, and I was like, I had to make it for it to be recorded for a podcast. After I made it, I sat down and like ate the entire thing. I was like, thank God. Just a relief. Were you gonna ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh, young Cosmo.
What is your favorite recipe from the book?
That I never had an answer for this for Where Cooking Begins, because it just changed all the time. But for this book, very clearly the grilled squid with the blackened tomatoes. By far my favorite, and ironically, I know it's the one that the least amount of people are going to make.
People are scared of squid.
People are scared of squid. It's a grilling recipe. It's like
They're the two scariest things.
their bodies, like
I
bodies.
used to be really scared of squid, and I love to eat it. And one of like the beautiful upsides of the pandemic for me was that I developed a relationship with my fishmonger, which like
Amazing.
I can also be like, I have a fishmonger.
Who's your
Mermaid's
fishmonger?
Garden.
I love
Oh,
I love it.
And one day she was like, do you buy squid? And I was just
They
like, are
have
you
good frozen
kidding?
squid there too.
No, and it turns out it's incredibly easy.
Yeah.
Like unreal. It's like it's easier than popping over a can of chickpeas. Like, why was I so scared of squid?
You probably don't have to clean them.
That's
So if you've ever bought them where you have to
You have
like,
to, rip out.
there's a beat. I mean, anything
Oh, no,
that
I've
is
done
like,
that.
you've done the beat.
I've gone like all the way in, and now I'm like, I pull out the like cartilage.
Yeah.
It's really, really like it feels good to pull that out.
It's pretty cool. So that's by far my favorite. And it's also a recipe that I had written down in that list, like pre-pandemic. I had a lot of like, I was traveling then still, and I had a couple airplane rides where it was just like, there's no Wi-Fi. I'm sitting with the offline Google Doc, just trying to populate those chapters. And that was an idea I had in my head. And then there were days where I was just like, I gotta develop 3 of these. So who's getting developed today? When I looked at the recipe title I had written down, I had no idea. I was like, what the hell was I thinking? And it ended up being this really fun day where I was outdoors grilling. It was chilly. I was like, blackened tomatoes and pimenton and like squid, like it sounds good, but I don't know how it's gonna come together. And I opened a couple of cookbooks and kind of looked around and thought about flavor combos, and just went out to my backyard with the spices I thought I was going to use and the tomatoes and the squid and a cast iron pan. And I just had that day of just cooking for fun. And then I loved how it turned out. And I was like, okay, we can do this. No, you gotta we can't repeat. I could take questions from you all night.
I was gonna do a follow-up question.
Okay, well, was it? We'll do a follow-up to your follow-up.
All right. Well, I think we have time for just one more. This one comes from Stephanie. It's one that I'm also very curious about. Yeah, I feel like you developed so many recipes in your career, especially having Where Cooking Begins, and now that sounds so good. So Stephanie asks, what inspires you to create new recipes that are different and delicious?
Well, I mean, part of this is like, it's my job. So I would like to get paid to do what I do. It sometimes involves like having to come up with a new recipe. It's really hard coming to the end of this cookbook. I felt like I was almost out. I was like, I'm out. And there was 100 recipes. I didn't have 100 recipes like in my back pocket. And so creating them took a lot out of me. And I actually think that I keep doing it because it is fun for me. I like it. And it has a payoff that is necessary, which is that we have to eat every day. So, but at the end of work of that sounds so good, I sort of was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And I have a Patreon channel, which I launched last November. And it was really through the process of creating new videos for Patreon that I tapped back into like, ooh, I have an idea of something that could be kind of fun, because the show that I was doing was organized by pieces of equipment. So season 1 was like Dutch oven, and then cast iron skillet, and then just sort of thinking through all the uses for some of that equipment gave me ideas for things I could make, and feeling like I could come up with another new recipe that I really liked was like very, very reassuring. I'm sure it's like riding a bike again or something like that, but I think it's just to keep going because it's fun. It's sadly what I do for fun.
I think it's sad. I think it's happy.
It's
I don't think
working
it's
now.
I mean, we get to benefit from it. So.
Sometimes I'm like, should I play ping pong? There's things you could do.
You could do both.
It's true.